So today, on our very first episode of the Janice Oasis, I'm happy to welcome Kathryn Zukof. She's an expert in change management and organizational design, and she's also the author of The Hard and Soft Sides of Change, which is how I met her. I read her book earlier this year and did a review and connected over LinkedIn. And I've been fortunate enough to chat with her here and there, and she agreed to do my very first episode of the podcast. So it's really cool to have Kathryn here. Thank you so much, Kathryn. Did I
Thank you,
capture
Nola.
everything?
I'm thrilled that we were able to connect a while ago, and I'm equally thrilled that we've been able to maintain the connection.
Yes, it's always helpful, especially when you just have a similarity in thought. Sometimes it's really fun to explore that. And so, one of the things that I really wanted to ask you was about the red team that you talk about in chapter 8. Would you like to explain what the red team is in the change management process and how that can be used and how you've seen it used in hybrid remote work planning?
Sure. Thank you. So the red team concept is a fascinating idea that I've been fortunate to experience in organizations and also to do some research about and to read about. And the idea of a red team it's actually based on an idea that dates all the way back to, I think it was the Middle Ages, when the Catholic Church was trying to select popes. And I'm sorry, not popes, saints. And what they wanted to do was, there were a lot of people who were advocating for a certain individual to be designated a saint. And so what the Catholic Church did was it created the official role, the official position of a devil's advocate. And a devil's advocate was someone who basically would say, not so fast. Let's look at all of the possible factors why we may not want this individual to be considered a saint. Let's look at the flaws of this particular individual. The idea then was adopted many centuries later by organizations that were basically trying to improve their decision making and their project execution. And so what they started doing was saying, what we're going to do is identify a group of individuals, a team, and we'll call this team the red team. And what we will do is say that their sole purpose as a team is to tell us everything that's wrong with an idea that we're interested in pursuing, everything that's wrong with a project plan that we're about to put in place. The whole idea of having a separate team to do this is that you want to eliminate cognitive biases, that people have a bias toward when they're working on something. Let's say, for example, if you're deciding to proceed to a hybrid work environment, the team that is, or the individuals that are putting together the plan to introduce a hybrid work environment, maybe they can start to fall in love with their own plan. They stop seeing the potential drawbacks, the mistakes, the hidden assumptions or the mistaken assumptions in their plan. And if you ask people to review a plan and say, let's just look at, here's our plan for introducing a hybrid environment. You let us know, why do you think this will work? Why do you think it won't work? There are many social forces that could prevent someone from telling you what they see as in terms of what could potentially go wrong. People really try to be positive. They try to be very balanced. And so they try to say, oh, I can see how your idea would work in X, Y, and Z way. And so they may not actually tell you what's on their minds in terms of why it won't work. There's a lot of social pressure, especially in the workplace, to be positive about things. And I could go into a whole discussion about why that is.
Psychological safety, anyone?
For the moment. So the idea of a red team is to say, we're going to assemble a team that exists purely for the purpose of telling us what's wrong with our plan. So again, with a move to hybrid, you would assemble a group of individuals and ask them to review your plans for moving to a hybrid work environment and say, tell us what's wrong with this plan. Tell us why this isn't going to work. Tell us where you see the downside of this plan is. And the hope is that they will be very honest with you, the members of this team, and that you will then have the opportunity to listen, hear what they have to say, and then potentially make corrections if they find something that's particularly valid.
Right. It's almost like a preview.
It's a preview. It's what David Garvin from Harvard talks about: learning before doing, learning while doing, and learning after doing. This is learning before doing. It's really saying before you take an action, gather a group of people and ask them to specifically, because it's their job, tell you why this isn't going to work so that you can listen, you can learn from them, and then you can improve that decision or that plan before you even put it into place.
Yeah. And the benefits are it really is engaging, especially for those people, if they've got a safe space to express the concerns, but they're also acting with generosity as well, too, because they're hopefully improving the plan so that the other coworkers aren't going to have to be forced to work with a plan that isn't necessarily in everyone's best interest, right?
Yes, yes. And every plan has some components that could be improved.
Right.
Every plan has some components where it's just not going to work. And so the idea is to pull together a group of people who, out of their true generous commitment to the organization, their love for the organization and for their coworkers, really want to say, let us help you make this plan better. It's also, yes, it's people often just naturally walk around with ideas in their heads about why something is going to work, but also why it isn't going to work. And what the red team concept does is it says, since it's that those ideas are naturally going to occur anyway, where people are going to have some ideas about why something isn't going to work, we're going to provide a platform and a structure and a process for those ideas to be.
It's really amplifying the employee voice in a way that's
Yes,
beneficial
yes,
for both the
absolutely.
employer and the employees. And that's one thing that I think a lot of people miss in the change management process. People who are willing to speak up and tell you what their concerns are and where they think there might be blind spots are really actually the best advocates you could ever have, because if you can listen to them and tweak that plan, they're going to be your best advocates.
Yes, yes. I'm very frustrated with organizations that really focus on resistance, and especially when they focus on resistance as a negative. Because in my experience, most people, including myself, at times have concerns about a change that's about to be introduced, not because they dislike change. People change all the time. People embrace changes all the time, but because they have very legitimate concerns about the action actually working. And this is a process to ensure that those very valid concerns are surfaced and heard so that the organization can act upon them. Sometimes during a red team meeting, a team will present concerns that the leaders who are enacting the change have already thought about. And it's just a risk that they know that for whatever reason the organization needs to take. That's okay. It's fine to take an informed risk. The idea of a red team is to say, we just want to make sure that we're moving forward with our eyes, with as much information as we can to make a smart decision.
And that actually adds to transparency too, because people might express those concerns and management can totally say, we understand that, but this is why we're making the decision and this is what we're planning if this happens. It's just an additional layer of transparency that can be added, and it just improves that conversation and that engagement.
Yeah, employees don't want to feel like they're being sold to. They want to feel that the organization has considered the positives and also the negatives associated with some plan, because every plan has the pros and the cons. And so it does create more trust and more transparency when leaders speak from a voice of there are this is going to happen and we think this is a benefit, but there also are some concerns about this and some downside, and we understand that. And we're doing what we can to minimize the impact of that downside, but there may be times where we can't completely mitigate it.
Right, exactly. Now, for smaller organizations, if you don't necessarily have the staff power to have an entire team, is there an ideal size for a red team?
I have seen red teams as small as 3 members, as large as 20 some odd members. I have seen and I have heard about organizations that may hold multiple red team meetings on the same topic because they want to make sure that they're getting many different voices. You can just basically designate one person as your devil's advocate. And there is a benefit to having a separate conversation with that person as opposed to embedding them in the team that's really focused on go, let's proceed. However, Adam Grant has written a book recently, I think it's Think Again, and he really goes into that whole devil's advocate idea. And so think again before you do something, check in with people who may tell you this may not be there may be a better way to do this, or this may not be the right thing to do at this time. Just hear me out. And if you're a very small organization, just asking someone to play the role of devil's advocate and saying, look, I know you have some very positive ideas about this. For the next half hour, please just tell me everything that you think could be a trap that we're about to fall into. And when you invite people to do that, they won't feel that social pressure to be positive. You're basically saying, your job right now is to tell me what's wrong. And some people can really excel at that.
Some people are gifted at that, yes.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And they may be people you want to consider putting on your red team or designating as your devil's advocate.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not necessarily a skill a lot of people perceive to be a positive sometimes. So giving them a role to play that really embraces their strength and their personality and their mindset, it's amazing how that could actually be embraced and actually flipped into a positive. And then maybe you flip their narrative and it works into your coaching session for them too, because maybe that's something they can add into their career path, right?
Yes, in the organizations that I think are the most mature in terms of their use of red teams, they certainly include on their red teams individuals who have some technical expertise in the idea or expertise in the idea that is being reviewed. So, for example, with a return to a hybrid work environment or implementing a hybrid work environment, you may end up needing an IT person to participate, someone from HR, someone from an operations, somebody in a supervisory capacity. You may want to include people with those perspectives, but you typically know in an organization who those real critical thinkers are. Who are the people who can always basically think of things in a different way and think of the potential risks. And so those are good individuals to include. And then your naysayers, the people who basically are telling you this isn't going to work, or they're telling their coworkers this isn't going to work.
Right.
If you can include them on your red team, that would be terrific as well. The interesting thing about red teams is as I said, mature organizations, is that they try not to tap into the same individuals time and time again. Really for the development, first of all, they want to develop that critical thinking skill and that ability to voice concerns among their entire employee population. So they like to rotate who they include on a red team, because that can be a developmental experience. But they also want to ensure that those individuals who are always seeing the kind of the downside of an idea are put into or asked to play an advocacy role some of the time as well, because that will help them develop the flip side of those red team skills.
Yeah, it's almost like mental agility.
Yes.
Can you see both sides of an argument, even though you may not share that opinion? Can you flip and actually argue for the contrary side. I think they teach that actually in debate club at school. I remember
Well,
being asked to do that.
well said. Well said.
Yeah, interesting thing that you said about the diversity on a red team. It's also important, I think, to bring in people who are parents or they may have experienced discrimination at work for whatever reason. There's a lot of evidence that says that people of color, parents, mothers, women in general, are experiencing more trouble with the pandemic and have benefited from work from home. And so to bring in those perspectives and ask them to identify what works. But on the flip side, to also bring in like people who aren't parents.
Absolutely.
To
And
compile a team that represents a lot of different interests, then I think you get really well-rounded feedback.
absolutely. I could not agree more. And for a red team, or really any time an organization is creating a team, but certainly for a red team, after you have assembled and your list of potential team members, I always recommend taking a step back and saying, does this team really represent the diversity that we have in so many different ways, whether it's age diversity or diversity in terms of race or in terms of parenting status or tenure with the organization. There's so many different ways in which you could construe diversity. Does your team really reflect the diversity of your organization? Because especially with something as important as a hybrid work environment, you're making some decisions that could affect every employee in the organization. And so you want to make sure that you're really tapping into those many diverse voices. So thank you for raising that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important thing. I've been part of conversations where I can see that there's not diversity, and it's actually awkward sometimes to bring it up because it's difficult to make sure that you're representing it when you're actually not a member of that group. So you might be able to see it, but you're not a member of the group.
I can imagine on a red team meeting on any topic, one of the questions you may ask the red team to consider is who is not present in the room right now, whose voice we need to hear. You may need to have a follow-up red team discussion with those individuals who they identify.
Right, exactly. And it's not a one and done kind of thing. I like that you bring that up too. It could be you assemble the red team at different points in your plan. So even, and things may change, like right at the moment, the new variants that are coming in too. You're making the plan now, but who knows what's going to happen. So you may have to start your red team again once things tweak and you have to change again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, back to my old buddy, David Garvin at Harvard, he talks about learning after doing as well. And so I really see the red team coupling very nicely with the whole idea of the after action review or action review idea, where after you take an action, you're getting people together to really discuss what was our objective, what's working, what isn't working, why are we getting the results we're getting, and what do we do about it to ensure and have a very honest discussion at that point as well to decide, okay, we're post taking a few actions, what do we need to do? Some of the research that comes out of the whole which organizations thrive during the pandemic and which struggle the most, some research shows that the organizations that were able to take action rapidly, fail from their results, and then learn from their failure and take another action very quickly, did better. Those were the organizations that basically said, we're not going to make a big decision and then say, that's it, we've made a decision and that's the decision that we're going to have in place for the whole duration of whatever is to come. They basically said, we're going to try this out and then we're going to check in and listen to the people who are affected and then tweak our decision, basically make a better decision. And it may mean throwing out what we had decided previously. So there needs to be learning across the entire spectrum.
And I think it's really important to have that ability to as Adam Grant says, to think again and say, is it really working? And to be able to change your mind without it really impeding your authority too. So how do you approach that from a humble servant leadership type of attitude to make sure that the plans that you're making are really working and serving all the different stakeholders, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. I love the whole red team concept. It was the part of your book that really just made me sit up and go, "Oh, cool!" I didn't actually know anything about the whole Roman Catholic Church aspect of sainthood.
I have to say that I have been on red teams before. They're used a lot in the military, as you can imagine. You know, before they engage in a maneuver, they do a red team on ideas. They're used a lot in organizations that are considering mergers and acquisitions, where they're basically, and that's where I was first introduced to the idea many years ago, when I was working for an organization that was growing through acquisitions. And when you're working on an acquisition team, you really fall in love with your project and you just feel like go. And there needs to be a team that is saying, this is really bad, and here's why this isn't going to work. And it's hard to do both. And so the idea of saying we're going to create a separate group that's focused just on saying why this is the wrong idea can be very helpful. And then I've seen the idea applied to organizations embracing and implementing lots of other changes.
Yeah, so is it really more something that like an organization that has embraced change management and it really has a mature change management process that you see this in more?
Anyone can, you don't have to have a mature change management practice in your organization. Anyone can say, I think we need to get some other voices and let's really listen to ask a few individuals or an individual to play the role of devil's advocate. What is important and what the research does show is that organizations embrace the idea of a red team concept and really use it most effectively when they truly make it safe for individuals to express a divergent opinion. And so you need to, if you're going to proceed with a red team, there are lots of rules of the road that you need to agree to. There cannot be any penalty for an individual saying, this is why I think it's not going to work. You've asked them to really take a risk. And because again, the natural positivity is really rewarded in organizations. And you need to really make it as rewarding for an individual to voice the negative. And that's a risk that you're asking them to take. And so there must not be any negative consequences that the individual suffers because of that. There also needs to be a real agreement that what happens during the red team meeting stays in a red team meeting, that you want to make sure that the individuals who you've asked to review your plans in advance before anyone else knows about them, that they're not going to leave that meeting and start spreading rumors. So that takes maturity on their part as well. I think it takes mature individuals or individuals who agree to abide by a certain set of rules. You don't necessarily need to have a mature change management practice.
Okay, that's good to know, because a lot of different organizations were thrown into the pandemic, right? And they may
Yes.
not be, they're at all kinds of different stages of development in terms of the organization. So it's good that it's achievable even if you haven't necessarily embedded change within your processes. Right?
Can I just comment on that for a second? Because because I think of that a lot when it comes to the move to the hybrid work environment. Because the changes that organizations needed to implement as we were entering into the COVID pandemic situation, these were changes that organizations had to make rapidly, really rapidly. Literally, regulations were changing, information was changing on the fly. And one day you thought you were going into the office, and the next day you had to figure out how to satisfy the needs of your workforce and satisfy the needs of your customers in a completely different way. And that had to happen very rapidly. The move back doesn't need to happen in quite as rapid a fashion. Organizations do have the opportunity to really take a pause and think about what they're doing. There isn't a switch that needs to be flipped quite as rapidly. I'm not saying go slow about it, but organizations don't necessarily have the same intense time pressure in making decisions about hybrid as they did for the decisions that they had to make to basically go to, let's say, a complete remote environment at the beginning of the pandemic. So you may have time to pull people together to have the kind of discussions now that you didn't have back in the very early days of the pandemic.
So you can add in time for really thinking of the intention of really what you want to achieve with the hybrid and how you want to define the office and use it in a different way than you may have before the pandemic.
Absolutely.
And it would need to be done in 3 days. Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's excellent. I think we are coming up to time, so I wanted to thank you. It's been a wonderful discussion, very thoughtful, very really helpful, I think, to a lot of people who haven't necessarily come across that technique. So thank you, Kathryn. I wanted to appreciate your time. We had some technical issues the first time we tried to do this. Kathryn is a wonderful technical expert there too. She even had a spare laptop to even try to get it going, so who knew? Anyways, I wanted to say thank you. I appreciate it. And if you are looking to connect with Kathryn, I will have her website and her book listed in the show notes. And definitely check her out. She's a wonderful resource for change.
As are you, Nola. So thanks so much for the opportunity, and best wishes as we both navigate through this very interesting, changing world.
Awesome. And now my dog is barking because the doorbell's ringing. So yay, work from home. Perfect timing. All right. Thank you so much, Kathryn.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.